I never imagined a simple violation notice would spiral into an all-out war. But when the HOA towed all my cars and slapped me with outrageous fines, they had no idea who they were dealing with. The real shock hit when they realized the towing company they hired to punish me was actually mine. The bright orange violation notice was impossible to miss, taped squarely on my front door like a warning shot from a tyrant too cowardly to deliver it face to face. It screamed, excessive vehicles violation. Immediate action required. Fine $500. My eyebrows knit in frustration as I read the letter, the bureaucratic threats in the fine print only adding fuel to the fire. The HOA, in all its self-righteous glory, had decided my driveway was suddenly a problem. 3 cars, my wife's Audi Q5, my Porsche 911, and my daughter's Honda Civic, were all parked neatly in our own driveway. No overgrown grass, no oil stains, no junkers cluttering the space. Just 3 well-maintained, legally registered vehicles parked where I'd paid to park them. I stepped back inside, the notice still in my hand. My wife, Emily, was at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, reviewing notes for her hospital shift. She looked up, instantly catching the irritation on my face. Karen Mitchell, our insufferable HOA president, was a notorious figure around here, the power-hungry dictator of the neighborhood. She lived just 2 doors down, her surgically frozen smile masking a personality so controlling it made dictators seem reasonable. Clipboard in hand, bylaws like scripture, she thrived on petty control. According to Karen, owning 3 cars was now an offense punishable by fines and towing. The notice cited a newly added bylaw, maximum of 2 vehicles per driveway, with all others forced into the garage. Our garage was half taken up by medical supplies and storage, making that impossible. Our daughter Lily wandered in, still rubbing sleep from her eyes and stretching in her college hoodie. She read the notice and blinked in disbelief, realizing her car was suddenly a violation. Emily sighed and rubbed her temples, frustrated with the absurdity. I grabbed my keys and headed straight to the HOA office to confront Karen. The office was a shrine to bureaucracy, walls plastered with framed bylaws like twisted trophies. Karen looked up from her computer with that fake, passive-aggressive smile. She explained the stricter parking rules were about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. I wanted to laugh. 3 cars in a driveway counted as clutter. Karen's reply was all about rules and fees. Appeals came with a non-refundable $250 processing charge. It was clear the HOA was weaponizing petty regulations against me. I wasn't about to pay a fine for something that wasn't an issue until Karen decided it was. She warned me the fine would double in 7 days and that unpaid fines could lead to towing at my expense. The thought of losing my cars over this ridiculous power trip made my blood boil. I left the office, my mind racing. Karen was watching me from her window, eyes narrowing with satisfaction. I parked my cars right back in the driveway and stood there, arms crossed, knowing this was far from over. The next morning, I woke to find the driveway empty. My wife's Audi, my Porsche, and my daughter's Honda were gone. Karen had actually followed through. That moment of realization, her petty authority had escalated to outright theft, hit hard. Before I could let my anger fully surface, my phone rang. It was Eric, one of my dispatchers from the towing company I owned. The game had just taken an unexpected twist. Eric's voice crackled through the phone, casually dropping the bombshell. The HOA had called his towing company to haul off my black Porsche, Audi, and silver Honda Civic, and they'd already paid up front. I nearly dropped my phone, stunned. The HOA had unknowingly used my own business to tow my cars to my own lot. A deep chuckle escaped me as I rubbed my temple, imagining the absurdity. Eric admitted it felt strange but shrugged. Money was money. I told him to hold the cars and that I'd swing by later. Karen thought she had won. She thought she'd caught me off guard. But instead, she handed me a loaded gun, begging me to pull the trigger. I kept calm the rest of the day, acting like nothing was wrong. No calls, no emails, no rage. I wanted her to savor that tiny victory before I flipped the entire game on its head. That evening, I drove to the impound lot where my 3 cars sat, untouched behind the fence. The irony was delicious. I grabbed the paperwork and, in under 5 minutes, had every single vehicle released, free of charge. But I wasn't finished. I called Eric back with a plan. Every time the HOA called for a tow, accept it, but send the cars straight to a reserved lot, no fees, no processing. They'd keep towing them, and we'd keep cycling them back out. They'd think I was some kind of Houdini. Eric laughed, already excited for the chaos. The next morning, I parked all 3 cars in the driveway, coffee in hand, making a show of washing my Porsche. Across the street, Karen stood gripping her clipboard so hard her knuckles whitened. She wanted to confront me but held back. I smiled, waved, and she stormed inside. By lunchtime, the cars were gone again, another tow, another fee, another failed power play. For 3 more rounds, I let the HOA send the tow trucks. Each time, my employees took my cars only for them to magically reappear the next morning. Karen's frustration was obvious. She watched me every day, trying to unravel the mystery. On the 4th day, I cranked up the trolling. My guys towed one of the cars themselves and parked it in my lot before the HOA even had a chance. Karen showed up screaming at the driver, demanding to know where her missing car was. The driver, in on the joke, just shrugged. Karen's face turned red, pointing accusingly at my driveway as if it had betrayed her. I stepped outside, stretching casually. "Everything okay, Karen?" I asked, sipping coffee. She snapped, demanding to know where the Porsche was. I feigned innocence. "Must have gone for a drive." She hissed, storming off, furious. That was the end for her. For 5 more days, I let the cycle repeat: retrieve, park, tow, retrieve, burning through the HOA's budget and patience. Every time, I had the last laugh. The board finally called an emergency meeting. I arrived fashionably late, soaking up the tension. Karen, looking 10 years older, demanded to know how my cars kept reappearing. I shrugged and slid a paper across the table. Her face drained as she realized I owned the towing company they'd been using. The board gasped. I leaned back, savoring the moment. Every tow order meant they were paying me. Karen whispered a curse under her breath, barely able to contain her fury. I cut her off with applause, making it clear I'd made my point. Karen was unraveling. Every morning, she stormed across her lawn, glaring at my driveway, willing my cars to vanish. It must have driven her insane. The HOA's latest newsletter was a passive-aggressive masterpiece targeting repeat offenders, thinly veiling her desperation. But I knew who she was really after. I let the game continue for another week, casually strolling to my cars each morning with coffee while Karen fumed across the street. At one point, I left a note on my Porsche's windshield before it was towed: "Nice try. See you tomorrow." I had barely finished lunch when Eric texted, "Yo, they just towed your Porsche again. This is getting hilarious." I chuckled, shaking my head. The HOA was basically torching its own budget, throwing cash at my company just to annoy me. They were unknowingly funding my next vacation. But as much as I enjoyed the chaos, I knew Karen wouldn't take this lying down. She'd escalate, and I was ready. The next notice wasn't about towing. It was a $3,000 fine for repeated vehicle storage violations. I laughed out loud opening the envelope. $3,000 for parking in my own driveway? They must be insane. But then I saw the note in bold: failure to comply would lead to legal action and potential liens on my property. Karen was playing dirty now. She wasn't just trying to move my cars, she wanted to bleed me dry. Still, I didn't crack. I let the fines pile up, unopened envelopes stacked on my kitchen counter like trophies. I knew they had no legal teeth, but Karen was determined to break me. When the $3,000 fine didn't faze me, the next letter threatened mandatory garage inspections, a clear attempt to shove my cars out of sight. I almost wanted to let them in just to watch their faces when they realized the garage was full, no space for the cars. Instead, I did what any sane person would, I ignored them. Then Karen made her next move, an emergency HOA meeting. The email arrived in the middle of the night, summoning residents to discuss an urgent community issue. The wording was meant to scare, to make people think something dire was happening. Maybe it was for Karen. This wasn't about the neighborhood. This was about me. I made sure to arrive late, strolling into the packed room while Karen was mid-rant. Every chair was full, neighbors whispering, eyes flicking to me as I entered. Karen stopped mid-sentence the moment she saw me, eyes narrowing. "Ah, Mr. Thompson," she said with a tight-lipped smile. "So glad you could finally join us." I smirked. Didn't want to miss the show. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Karen's jaw tightened as she gestured to a slideshow behind her. Blown-up photos of my driveway covered the screen like a crime scene, my Porsche, my wife's Audi, my daughter's Honda, all circled in red as if I was running a black market car ring. "This," Karen announced, sweeping her hand, "is what's ruining our community." I let out a short laugh. "Parking?" Karen's head snapped to me. "Not just parking, Mr. Thompson. Blatant disregard for the rules." I folded my arms, waiting. This was going to be good. For weeks now, she continued pacing, we've made multiple attempts to enforce guidelines, only to be met with defiance. Vehicles are removed, only to mysteriously return. Fines are issued, only to be ignored. She turned to the crowd, voice rising, "How can we maintain order when some residents believe they're above the rules?" A few nodded, murmurs of agreement, but mostly uncomfortable shifting. Sensing weakness, Karen pounced. She slapped a new proposal onto the table. "That's why I propose an immediate bylaw amendment allowing the HOA to enforce vehicle removals without owner consent, with all towing fees paid by the violator." I raised an eyebrow. "Without due process?" Karen didn't flinch. "We already have due process." I scoffed. "Then why have you spent thousands towing my cars, only to have them keep showing up?" Her eye twitched. She knew I was baiting her but couldn't resist. "That's another issue," she said, voice sharper. "Residents deserve transparency. We all deserve to know how your cars keep returning." I smirked. Magic. A few laughs broke out. Karen looked ready to explode. "This isn't a joke," she snapped. "We take community standards seriously and won't tolerate mockery." I stepped forward, letting the tension hang, then pulled out my own paper, a copy of recent invoices from my towing company. "You know what's funny, Karen?" I said loud enough for the room. "The only one making a mockery of the HOA is you. While you've thrown thousands at towing companies to punish me, I've been making money off it." Karen's face drained. Whispers erupted. I tossed the invoices on the table. "Turns out, the towing company you hired to remove my cars. I own it." Karen froze. The board stiffened. Silence swallowed the room. I shrugged. "I was happy minding my business," I continued, "but you kept poking the bear. Every time you called for a tow, every time you fined me, you were paying me." Someone in the back burst out laughing. Karen slammed her hands on the table. "This is a scam." I tilted my head. "A scam I didn't make. You called my company, you did that." One board member, Greg, who usually sided with Karen, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Karen, is this true?" She opened her mouth, closed it, opened again. "Nothing." I leaned in, voice low so only she could hear. "Careful, Karen. Push too hard, and I might start looking into where all that HOA money's really going." She paled. She knew I wasn't bluffing. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Karen was unraveling. The moment I exposed the HOA using my towing company to enforce these ridiculous fines, I saw her grip on the neighborhood crack. The board support wavered. Worst of all for her, I wasn't done yet. I expected retaliation, but didn't think she'd be dumb enough to go further. Morning came like any other. I grabbed coffee and stepped outside to admire my perfectly legal cars parked exactly where they belonged. The Porsche gleamed in the sun, my wife's Audi untouched, my daughter's Honda just as last night. This had to drive Karen mad. Weeks of towing battles had left her with no legal moves. So she did what desperate, power-hungry people do when they lose control: she broke the law. I didn't notice at first. I got in the Porsche, turned the key, about to back out, then saw it. A long jagged scratch ran across the driver's side door, all the way to the back. Not an accident, not a mistake. Intentional. My grip on the wheel tightened. I stepped out to inspect it. That's when I noticed the shattered glass. My passenger window was smashed in. Footprints on the seat. Someone had been inside my car. My stomach burned with rage, but I wasn't stupid. Instead of reacting, I turned and walked straight back inside. I didn't call the HOA. I didn't storm over to Karen's door demanding answers. I already knew who did it, but more importantly, I already had proof. I pulled up my phone and accessed the live security feed from my driveway. 3 different cameras, all with night vision, all recording in crystal clear quality. I rewound the footage, fast-forwarding through the night until 2:37 a.m. A figure crept into my driveway. Dark clothes, hood up, moving cautiously, looking over their shoulder, but not cautious enough. I zoomed in. Karen. It was her. I actually laughed out loud. This woman had lost her mind. She must have thought that without a towing company to weaponize, her only option was to destroy my property herself. I watched, barely believing it, as she pulled out a metal key and dragged it across my car's paint. Then, as if that wasn't enough, she grabbed a brick, a damn brick, and smashed my passenger side window. The camera caught her face clear as day. The way she smirked afterward, that was when I knew she was finished. She'd crossed the line. She hadn't just vandalized my car, she committed a crime. I didn't hesitate. I saved the footage, backed it up to 3 different drives, and sent a copy to my lawyer. Then I made a few calls. First, the police. Yeah, I'd like to report criminal vandalism. I have it all on camera. Second, the insurance company. Yeah, I've got damage to my vehicle. The culprit? Don't worry, I have clear footage. And third, the local news. If Karen wanted to play dirty, she had no idea how filthy I could get. The cops arrived first. I stood outside, arms crossed, as 2 officers examined my Porsche. Officer Daniels was already shaking his head. This isn't random, he muttered, running his hand over the deep scratches. Deliberate. You said you have footage? I handed him my phone, and he played the video. His eyebrows shot up. Wait, is this, he squinted, Karen Mitchell, HOA president? Right, I grinned. The younger officer, Rodriguez, let out a low whistle. She actually used a brick, and didn't even wear a mask. Damn, that's sloppy. Daniels nodded. Open and shut. We'll file the report. You want to press charges, right? I grinned wider. Absolutely. Karen had spent weeks trying to ruin my life, but this was different. No legal way left to get rid of my cars, so she resorted to crime. Now, she'd pay. The next part of my plan was even better. It wasn't just the cops I called, it was the local news station too. When the reporters showed up that afternoon, camera crew in tow, the entire neighborhood came out. I gave them everything: damage to my car, filmed from every angle, the HOA's history of harassment, explained in full, security footage of Karen vandalizing my property, broadcast for all to see. By the time Karen realized what was happening, it was too late. She stomped across the street, red-faced and furious, just as the reporter turned to interview me. "You're exaggerating this whole situation," she snapped. The reporter didn't blink. "Ma'am, are you denying this is you on the footage?" Karen's mouth opened, closed, opened again. She was trapped. Deny it, and she lied on live TV. Admit it, and she confessed to a crime. I crossed my arms, barely containing my amusement. "So, Karen," I said loud enough for everyone, "what's the HOA's stance on criminal activity?" The neighborhood went dead silent. Then someone laughed. It was Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman fined by Karen last summer for having the wrong shade of flower pots. Well, she said, "looks like Karen's the real community problem, doesn't it?" More neighbors murmured in agreement. Karen looked around, realizing she was losing. Board members who once blindly supported her suddenly avoided eye contact. Neighbors who once feared her fines now watched her like the criminal she was, because she was. The police stepped forward. "Mrs. Mitchell, we're going to need you to come with us." Karen whipped around. "What? This is ridiculous. I was just..." She stopped herself. No excuse, no way out. I watched as they placed her in cuffs, right there in the street. Cameras caught everything. The mighty Karen Mitchell, queen of the HOA, hauled into the back of a police car while the entire neighborhood watched. I stood there, arms crossed, smirking. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. And it was only the beginning. Karen's arrest wasn't the end of the war, it was the beginning of the end. She thought she could terrorize the neighborhood unchecked, weaponizing fines and rules against anyone who dared defy her. But now, handcuffed in the back of a squad car, her reputation ruined, her kingdom crumbling. Still, I knew the HOA wouldn't just roll over. There were more snakes in that den. They'd scramble to save themselves, distance from Karen, pretend to be innocent bystanders. I wasn't going to let that happen. Karen had been the face of the HOA's tyranny, but she hadn't acted alone. Other board members had signed off on her decisions, enabled her power trip. They were complicit in every ridiculous fine, shady rule change, and underhanded scheme. And if Karen was willing to commit crimes, what else had the HOA been hiding? I planned to find out. I started by doing what Karen never expected, I followed the money. An HOA legally functions like a business. Every dollar in fees, fines, and penalties must be accounted for. Every transaction, vendor contract, and community improvement leaves a paper trail. Since Karen was gone, the HOA was vulnerable, no leader to cover tracks. I requested an audit. At first, the HOA stonewalled. Told me I had no right to their financials, that records were confidential, only the board could review them. They were wrong. By state law, as a dues-paying member, I had the right to inspect financial records anytime. If refused, I could take legal action. So I did. I filed a lawsuit, not just against Karen, but the entire HOA board. Claims, financial mismanagement, fraud, and illegal use of HOA funds. Lawsuits take time, but subpoenas move faster. Within a week, the HOA had to hand over their books. The moment I started digging through the numbers, I knew why they'd fought so hard to hide them. This wasn't just mismanagement. It was embezzlement. Tens of thousands of dollars had been diverted to mystery expenses, community maintenance fees never used for actual maintenance, vendor contracts that didn't exist, fake invoices, inflated charges, and worst of all, direct payments to Karen's personal bank account. Karen wasn't just a dictator, she was a thief. I took everything, every suspicious transaction, every missing dollar, every damning piece of evidence, and compiled a full report. Then I leaked it. I sent copies to every homeowner in the neighborhood. Copies to the local news. Copies to the state's HOA regulatory board. And then I called an emergency HOA meeting. By the time I arrived at the community center, the entire neighborhood was there. The room was packed, buzzing with outrage and whispered conversations. People had read the report. They knew what was coming. The remaining HOA board members sat at the front, looking like a firing squad waiting for their turn. None had spoken publicly since Karen's arrest. They had tried, and failed, to regain control. I walked up to the microphone, holding the stack of financial documents. "This," I said, my voice carrying across the hushed room, "is how the HOA has been stealing from us." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Over the last 3 years, this board has embezzled more than $80,000 from the community. Money that was supposed to maintain the neighborhood, improve property values, and fund actual projects. I flipped through the pages, reading key transactions. Here's a $12,000 charge for security services that doesn't exist. Here's $5,000 spent on community outreach, which shockingly went straight to Karen's personal account. And here's $19,000 in unexplained maintenance fees that never paid for a single repair. Whispers turned into full-blown shouting. "I'm not even finished." "Here's the best part," I said, holding up the final document. "You know all those fines you've been paying? The ones for violations Karen and her board made up. Guess what, they were never deposited into the HOA account. They were redirected into Karen's bank." Gasps. Shouts. "She robbed us," someone yelled. "We paid for this community," another voice shouted. A woman stood in the back, waving her report copy. "I've been fined 7 times this past year. Where the hell did my money go?" I turned to face the board members, who looked ready to puke. "Care to explain yourselves?" Greg, one of the spineless board members, adjusted his tie, voice shaking. "We had no idea Karen was." "Oh really?" I cut him off. "Because your signature is on half these transactions. You expect us to believe you blindly approved everything?" Greg shut up real fast. I turned back to the crowd. "Here's what happens next, this board. They're done." A loud cheer. "We're going to vote every single one of them out tonight." Another cheer. "And then we're going to press charges." The room erupted. One board member tried to sneak out but didn't make it. Neighbors physically blocked the exit. People were furious. Years of bullying, fining, and nickel-and-diming had led to this moment. Greg tried to speak again but it didn't matter. The vote happened on the spot, unanimous. Every board member gone. But I wasn't done yet. The next day, I met with my lawyer and officially filed charges against Karen and the entire former board: embezzlement, fraud, abuse of power, the works. Karen wasn't getting out of this one. The HOA dismantled. Fines refunded to every homeowner. And me? I parked all 3 cars in my driveway that night, Saturday, cracked open a beer on my porch, and smiled. The HOA was dead, and I had killed it. The collapse wasn't an explosion. It was a slow-motion implosion, a chain reaction of panic, resignations, and total financial destruction. Once the neighborhood voted out the board, the legal hell began. Lawsuits stacked like bricks. The state HOA regulatory board launched its own investigation into Karen and her cronies. And my expose barely scratched the surface. There were more missing funds, more expenses funneled into personal accounts, and a $25,000 landscaping charge that paid for Karen's private backyard renovation. Greg, the former treasurer, flipped immediately. When the auditor started poking around, he turned into a sniveling rat desperate to avoid jail time. He spilled everything: fake receipts, overbilling residents, Karen blackmailing homeowners into donating to special projects that were really slush funds for her spending. The court cases moved fast. The judge didn't waste time. Karen's defense was laughable. She tried playing the victim, blaming clerical errors and misunderstandings. But the prosecution pulled out the security footage of her vandalizing my car. That alone torpedoed her innocence. The best part? The lawsuits drained her dry. She fought to keep her house, but legal fees piled up. The court ruled she had to pay restitution to the homeowners she stole from. With no money left, she had one option: sell her house. And oh, how the tables had turned. She listed the house at a premium, thinking she'd still walk away with something. But this neighborhood was no longer under her rule. Without her iron grip, property values dropped. Turns out, running a place like a dictatorship doesn't attract buyers. I made sure she never got what she wanted. When potential buyers came by, I made it my mission to be outside, washing my 3 cars, chatting with neighbors, making sure everyone knew exactly what kind of HOA used to run this place. Yeah, Karen ran this neighborhood into the ground, I'd say, casually shaking my head. Took thousands from homeowners, got herself arrested. Place is finally bouncing back now that she's leaving. I watched the interested buyers vanish, one by one. The price dropped and dropped until she had no choice but to sell for way less than it was worth. Karen packed up in the dead of night. No goodbye, no farewell, just a U-Haul pulling out, loaded with the remnants of her miserable reign. I stood on my porch, beer in hand, watching her drive away for the last time. And for the first time since this whole war started, I finally had peace. The HOA dead. The board members facing financial ruin. Karen gone. And my driveway. Completely, beautifully, legally filled with my 3 cars. No more fines. No more notices. No more threats. I parked my Porsche front and center, just for the hell of it, threw my feet up on the porch railing, and enjoyed the view. Because the war was over. And I had won.